Hello, members and people on the podcast. Welcome back to Salem Witch Trials. We're now heading to the tavern, the pub, whatever you want to call it. It's a heart. It was called a tavern then, but taverns are actually pubs. They're clubs, pubs, But that's what it was called back then, where they're all going to gather. The next morning, so many people tried to crowd into Ingersoll's for the hearings that the proceedings had to be moved down the street to the much larger meeting house. All four afflicted girls were there to face their tormentors. The accused were questioned one at a time, starting with Sarah Good. Hathorne led the interrogations, more like a modern-day police detective grilling a subject for a confession than an impartial judge. From the nature of the unrelenting questions he asked, is it clear that he believed witchcraft was at work and that the three women were responsible? We don't know. What evil spirit have you familiarity with? Have you made no contact with the devil? Why do you hurt these children? Good's denials were to no avail. When the four girls confirmed their identification of Sarah as the tormentor, she denied the charge. At which point the girls became all dreadfully tortured and tormented for a short space of time. They claimed Good's spirit lunged out of her body at them. More denials from Sarah led to more cries and painful writhing from the girls. When pressed, Good eventually offered that Sarah Osborne was responsible for the girls' torments. Hathorne then questioned Sarah Good's husband, William Good. He had no reason to believe that she was a witch, aside from her ill temperament, he said. Though he concluded with the damning and punning statement, I may say, with tears, that she's an enemy of all good. The judges were in no mood for humour. They determined to hold Good for trial. Although the evidence was less compelling, the court held Osborne too, after the girls identified her as a tormentor. Tituba would prove to be the star witness, for her testimony fully confirmed fears that many witches were loose in Salem, and it unleashed a massive hunt to round up Satan's minions. A slave who was regularly described as an Indian, Tituba most likely was born in the Caribbean or Florida and brought to New England by Samuel Parris when he migrated from Barbados in 1680. She initially denied the charges against her, but under Hathorne's hounding, eventually admitted she was a witch. She described how Satan had revealed himself to her. I saw a thing like a man, and told me to serve him, she said. Good and Osborne, along with three strangers from Boston, were responsible for hurting the girls. Good's familiar was a yellow bird that sucked between her fingers. The devil had threatened to kill the children and had also sent a hog, a dog, and 2 cats to Tituba to encourage her to attack the girls. Witches were traditionally believed to have supernatural familiar spirits, imps sent by Satan, who aided them in their cruel acts. In return, the familiar, which usually took the form of an animal, sucked blood from the witch and thus gained nourishment. One of the most common forms of familiar was a cat, hence the traditional association of black cats with witches. Witches were also believed to be able to assume the shapes of animals, especially a strange one. This may suggest that a witch is present and nearby. Tituba confessed that, after continuous threats and pressure from the devil and his minions, she had finally relented and tormented all 4 girls, but then went on to apologise. I am very sorry for it. When Tituba started her testimony, the afflicted girls had been most distressed, yet when she confessed, they immediately quieted. Their sufferings recommended recommenced when Tituba said it was the spectre of Sarah Good that harmed the girls. The slave had been forced to ride upon a stick or pole, with Osborne and Good behind her, to fly off to hurt Hannah Putnam. That's Junior. Soon Tituba herself suffered torments. She claimed that Osborne and Good had attacked her, blinded her, prevented her from speaking freely. The Salem villagers' worst fears were recognised. A witch conspiracy threatened their whole community. And Tituba would be questioned 3 more times over the next 4 days. On March the 2nd, she provided detailed evidence of Satan's work. She had signed the devil's book with her own blood, and had also seen Good and Osborne marks contained therein. In all, there had been marks of signatures for 9 witches. She went so far as to describe how Satan and the witches' assembly had met in the palace parsonage, remaining invisible to the minister. Tituba's testimony was noteworthy in many ways. It gave officials what they wanted, proof that a witch conspiracy was operating in their midst, along with confession of sin and sincere contrition for diabolical acts. Tituba was a compelling and genuine witness. She loved Betty and did not want to hurt her, but had given way to Satan's threats. Now she threw herself on the mercy of the court. Her testimony was consistent through multiple examinations, and her details agreed perfectly with the sufferings described by the afflicted girls. Her statements were all the more believable because she described a textbook example of witchcraft, making a covenant with Satan, flying on a broomstick, attending witches' assemblies, and using witches' familiars. All had been described in detail by English authorities of the day, and were in William Perkins' A Discourse of a Damned Act of Witchcraft, 1608, a copy of which Samuel Parris was given on the first day of Tituba's testimony. Nonetheless, it is difficult to stereotype a witch, for as events in Salem would ultimately show, virtually anyone could be accused. Still, most people in the 17th century had a good idea of the main characteristics of the typical suspects, and the 3 who stood accused in Salem village fit the bill. Witches tended to be poor, marginalised women. They often possessed a quarrelsome or troubled nature, or had broken with the norms of society. To have a Native American slave, a distracted pauper, and a scandalous woman all charged with witchcraft meant they had rounded up the usual suspects. As Salem's Reverend John Higginson later observed, initially, the outbreak was very small, and looked on at first as an ordinary case which had fallen out before at several times in other places, and would be quickly over. Before 1692, more than 50 people had already been tried in New England for witchcraft, and at least 14 had been executed. Usually, no more than 1 or 2 witches were involved. Tituba said that 9 witches were present in the community. The Salem witch hunt would now begin in earnest. That's the next part, guys, of the Salem witchcraft trials. And bear in mind, this is actually historical fact, what we're going through here, before we go into anything else regarding the reality. Of course, there's always fiction and then the reality, isn't there? But, yeah, this is what is wrote in the history books. Like, over here we have the pamphlets from the assizes. It's kind of the same for the American witch trials. They had pamphlets for their witch trials, and this is where history gets them from. They get them from the pamphlets that were published at that time. So even though this is the recorded story of exactly what happened in history, that does not mean it's the actual truth. It's just how it was put down in history. There's a big difference. Thank you for listening. When we come back, we'll continue with the fearsome Satan himself. See what he's up to with the witches. Many blessings.